Hey everybody, getting situated here. So I am going to be talking to you today about strain theory, and specifically Merton's strain theory. It is a structuralist perspective like functionalism, which we have already discussed, and Merton took certain ideas from Durkheim. He's also a functionalist, but his views on the functions of deviance are just slightly different than Durkheim's. So other structuralists like Merton and like strain theory are narrowing their focus a little bit. So while Durkheim recognized that societies experience slightly different amounts of and types of deviance because their norms and their values are going to be slightly different from one place to another, strain theory really is setting about trying to understand why those differences exist. And so they question why we see more deviance in some societies or groups than in others. And in the case of strain theory in particular, the answer to that question has to do with inequality and has to do with income inequality. They argue that societies with greater degrees of inequality are likely to show more crime than those where people have roughly similar amounts of what the society values. And so what strain theory does is look at how inequality blocks access to conformity, resulting in strain. And that's why it's called strain theory, specifically because crime and deviance results when a person or a group of people experiences strain because of the pressure to achieve cultural goals, but lacking realistic opportunity to achieve those goals in the way that we are supposed to achieve them through the institutionalized means. So this chart right here really tells you everything that you need to know about what strain theory argues. So let's talk about what the cultural goals actually are. For Merton, he says the cultural goals are the things worth striving for in any particular society. And in American society, that is monetary success. Basically, it's the idea of the American dream. And he says Americans are bombarded on every side by precepts which affirm the right or often the duty of retaining this goal even in the face of repeated frustration. So don't quit, don't be a quitter, there's no such thing as fail, keep on trying to achieve and eventually you will. Keep on trying to acquire this high status that's associated with having a lot of wealth. And eventually you'll get there if you put in enough hard work. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? But how does one know when one has achieved financial success? What's the topping out point? We don't go around telling each other, congratulations on achieving the American dream, right? How do we know when we have achieved that? Is there a point that we can identify where we can say, okay, I'm done now. I have done what is expected of me, and so I can sit back and relax. What he argues is that there is no stopping point. Monetary success is conveniently indefinite and relative. And he supports that by citing some research that he doesn't go into detail with in this little snippet that's in your chapter. But this research shows that at each income level, Americans want just about 25% more. But of course, this just a bit more continues to operate once it is obtained. So once people get that, they find that they want to keep going, right? And that we are socialized actually to want to do that. the ongoing pursuit of more and more things. So what are the institutionalized means? What's the normative, expected, socially acceptable way of going about achieving the American dream? Well, what do we need to do first to do that? Get some education, right? Because you can't make money without a job, and you need an education to do that. Can you make money without a job? A legitimate job? Yes, you can, but the word legitimate is key there, right? We're talking about what are the legitimate, institutionalized, socially acceptable, expected, normative, valued ways of going about achieving the American dream. Graduate high school, right? If we were making a timeline, a Facebook timeline that's supposed to apply to everybody in America, and it starts with being born, the next thing is graduating high school, right? And just for ease, I lumped that together with college in the same education category. Now, does everybody go about getting a college education? No. Does everybody go about getting a college education directly after receiving a high school diploma? No. But increasingly in our society, and I know y'all know this is right, you experience pressure to make decisions about college when you're in 9th, 10th grade, and maybe even before that, right? We take elementary school children on tours of colleges here at AU, and have basketball camps and Kid University in the summer that they get to come up here to campus and experience a little bit of what it's like just being on the college campus, right? And that's a way of socializing people to value higher education. What do we do after we get our college degree? We immediately get a job in our chosen career field, right? Okay, maybe not immediately, but that's the idea. You get a degree and then you go get a job where you'll be using what you learned in your studies. What do we do after that? This is where, the pathway can really differ. But generally, every year or a couple times a year when I talk to students about what this normative pathway to the American dream looks like, this is generally what comes out, right? You get a job, and after you graduate college, you get married. A lot of students talk about being told by family you need to wait until after college to get married. And of course, when do we start a family? When do we have kids? Traditionally, we're expected to do that after we get married. Is that how everybody does it? No. Is that how I did it? No. But generally speaking, that's typically what's expected, right? And when you deviate from it, some people are going to question you or express concern, which suggests that they believe it's a deviation from the pathway or a deviation from certain values. And home ownership comes in there at some point, right? Because what is the American dream without the cute little house and the picket fence and the backyard and the cars and the 2.3 kids? I think the average amount of children that American families have now is actually 2.1, I think. And yeah, so there's another thing that you need to hit to be able to have that American dream. And then what happens after that? Do you get to sit back and relax? No, because you're constantly going to be doing home improvements to your house that you own. And you're going to be probably climbing the corporate ladder at your job. That's something that's going to be expected of you. Most people don't necessarily want to stay in an entry-level position. Why? Do they want the power and the prestige and the status? Maybe not, but they want the money, right, that comes with climbing the ladder, so to speak. It might not be climbing the corporate ladder. It might be, owning 2 businesses instead of 1, or, something of that nature. And then once you do that, yay, you can buy more stuff. You can buy more houses. You can buy more cars. You can pay for your children's college. All of these sorts of things. And is that reality? That pathway? Not necessarily, right? A lot of times it looks a lot different, and we do it in a much different order. But like I said earlier, a lot of times, and there's research on it, when you have children out of wedlock, some people are not going to like it. They're going to treat you anywhere from slightly poorly to very poorly afterwards. Not everybody, but some, right? And that's just one example of how we can divert from this pathway. But the idea remains there are certain expectations that we do certain things and that we do them in a certain order. And when we do those certain things, we're conformists. When we do them in that order, we're conformists. And so conformity means we accept the cultural goals, the plus sign is accepting, and we accept the institutionalized means. We go about living our life the way that we're expected to do so, hitting on all those points in order when we can, and we do value that American dream, and we do value and want to achieve monetary success and the status that comes with it. But some folks don't have legitimate access or easy access to those institutionalized means. This is where the blocked opportunity structure comes into place that we referenced earlier. So those who can't go about achieving the goal through the institutionalized means because of blocked opportunities, like discrimination in the workplace. They may opt out, get off that pathway, join a gang, become the leader of the gang, work their way up in the gang, and are going to go around the typical pathway, create their own pathway. And so their deviance is functional because it allows them to achieve the cultural goal, but in a non-normative and oftentimes, with innovation, criminal or at the least deviant means. Okay. We know that this characterizes JT because he tells Sudhir that he went and got a college education, right? And he went and got the corporate job, and he tried to climb the ladder. We don't know as much about marriage and home ownership, but so we'll just have to leave that out for now. But he tried to climb the corporate ladder, but he was getting consistently passed up for promotion by people who were white and who had less experience than he did. And so he set off on a deviant pathway, right? And that's innovation. Ritualism refers to individuals who they accept the institutionalized means, but they abandon the cultural goals. And I'm going to draw your attention to a quote from the chapter here. Coupled with the positive emphasis upon the obligation to maintain lofty goals is a correlative emphasis upon the penalizing of those who draw in their ambitions. Americans are admonished not to be a quitter, for in the Dictionary of American Culture, as in the Lexicon of Youth, there is no such word as fail. The cultural manifesto is clear. One must not quit, must not cease striving, must not lessen his goals, for for not failure but low aim is crime. So ritualism involves the abandoning or scaling down of the lofty cultural goals, usually that people anticipate they're not going to be able to achieve. They scale down or abandon the goals to the point where one's aspirations can be achieved. So it might be, I don't want to climb the corporate ladder. I don't want to be a manager. I don't want to be a supervisor. I don't want to be a CEO. I don't want to get up that far. And there can be different reasons for that. What Merton is suggesting is that this tends to happen when people perceive that they're not going to be able to achieve the cultural goals, or they anticipate that the opportunity will be blocked at some point. And so they abandon that and they no longer believe in it. And so they behave in generally the same way, just in terms of, getting an education, of working at a job, but they don't take it to those higher levels like we saw in our pathway. But in a lot of ways, they look like they're fitting in. Because they're engaging in some of the same behaviors, they just don't share the same attitudes and beliefs about the cultural goals. Retreatism, on the other hand, the minuses, again, mean rejection. And so they reject both the goals and the means. And I'll draw your attention again to the book. He does say that retreatism is the least common adaptation, and that conformity is the most common adaptation. What he says about retreatism is that these people are in society, but not of society. And so the examples that he gives includes vagrants, vagabonds, tramps, chronic drunkards, and drug addicts. Basically, these folks withdraw from society, right, and go out on their own and have their own sort of escape mechanisms. And I think it's, instead of thinking about drug addicts as falling into retreatism, because there are many functional alcoholics and functional drug addicts out there who do hold down a job, at least for some period of time. I think a better way of thinking of it is the hermit, to revisit that person who basically is sort of fed up with this whole system that we have and opts out and goes and lives alone, or with not very many other people, and does their own thing, right? You could even think of, some cults or small, subcultures of people who withdraw from society as fitting into this category. Now, rebellion, on the other hand, you see the plus and the minus, and what that means is they reject the cultural goals and the institutionalized means, but they replace them with alternatives. And not just alternatives for a small group like a cult, but they advocate for wide-scale, broad, social, systemic change, right? Rebellion leads men outside the environing social structure to envisage and seek to bring into being a new, that is to say, a greatly modified social structure. It presupposes alienation from reigning goals and standards. So they may have had trouble achieving the goals through institutionalized means. But instead of committing crime or continuing to achieve those cultural goals, they want to achieve a new set of cultural goals, and they think everybody else in society should as well, right? So they come to the table with a structured set of alternatives, right? In our society, organized movements for rebellion aim to introduce a social structure in which the cultural standards of success would be sharply modified, and provision would be made for a closer correspondence between merit, effort, and reward. So in other words, they're trying to bring the emphasis on the cultural goals and the emphasis on the institutionalized means to closer proximity, right? Instead of us having so much emphasis on the cultural goals and less emphasis on the means, they want to bring those closer together. And so what does that actually look like? You know, what's an example of rebellion? Basically, examples of rebellion consist of alternatives to capitalism, all right? Socialism, communism, anarchy, Occupy Wall Street. You know, they had goals. They did have goals. They were criticized for not articulating those goals that well, and were depicted as having no goals or organization or leadership or anything like that. But they did have some goals, and they wanted to make significant changes to the way that our society regulates our financial industries. And honestly, a really good example of rebellion in this context comes from Fight Club. And so again, I'm going back to, is that a 90s movie? I don't know, probably. But that's where I am. I guess I just need to accept it, right? I'm in the late 90s still. So they're just a really good example. So what happens in Fight Club, right, is not that the guys start a fight club and all of that aspect, but the people who are running the Fight Club, right, who started the whole thing, they actually they have this end goal of overthrowing or of destroying the banking and financial institutions. And the reason that they want to do that is it's going to erase everybody's debt. And so it will bring everybody in society to a point of equivalence. So it would do away with income inequality, or at least significantly reduce it. And they set some bombs off to be able to achieve that. And it really is rejecting and replacing with completely opposing values. So that's Merton's string theory. So what are some issues with this theory? You know, can you think of some crimes or types of deviance to which Merton's string theory doesn't really apply? Are there types of deviance depicted in Gang Leader for a Day or in Favela Rising that don't really fit neatly into this framework? Are all motivations financial in nature, right? This theory assumes that the most important cultural goal is financial success, and that may well be true, but are all crimes financial in nature? No. Are all people's motivations financial in nature? No, definitely not. We have a lot of other goals and values and concerns in our lives. And what about crimes of passion that are not tied to financial gain? What about types of deviance that are, non-criminal, that don't have anything to do really with financial accumulation of wealth or financial goals? What about other cultural goals that deviance might help a person obtain? It could fit in that way, but we'd have to reconceptualize of the cultural goals. And this is a big criticism of his. What about crimes among those who have social power, right? Whose opportunities weren't blocked. You got white-collar criminals who have climbed the corporate ladder and who are CEOs of their own businesses or are high up in the social status and high up in their organization. Doctors, for instance, right? What were those doctors in Mobile, Alabama motivated by? Well, financial gain, yeah, but were there opportunities for financial gain blocked? Not in any systematic kind of way that we know of, right? That seems to be more like sheer greed, right? So how does that really fit in to Merton's theory? And then when we think about the focus on those who do want to obtain financial success but don't have the means to do it and experience the blocked opportunities that make them deviate, not all lower class individuals, not all poor people engage in crime or deviance, right? Plus, how does one go from the point where they experience that blocked opportunity into gang life or into joining a rebellious group, right? What happens between those 2 points in time? There's got to be some things that happen between those 2 points in time, right? And the theories that we'll talk about next are much better equipped to account for that process. So next we'll be talking about general strain theory by Bob Agnew, and differential association theory, which is our learning theory, by Donald Sutherland, and Cressy. And one thing that you want to make sure to know about general strain theory is it actually is an integrated theory. What Bob Agnew is trying to do is include strain, learning, and social control variables, as well as even some more individualized variables, to be able to have a comprehensive explanation for crime and deviance.